These are 5 draft lessons from MTG Foundations that you can apply to future formats. First up, keep an eye out for 1-drops, cards like Healer's Hawk, Infestation Sage, and Llanowar Elves were key role players in MTG Foundations and some of the best commons in their colors. Just because a card is cheap doesn't mean it can't have a large impact on the game, which is something that has shifted in MTG limited design over time and is definitely culminating now with these sorts of 1-drops. Next, look out for secret gold cards. Now, we all know about the obvious gold cards like Ruby Daring Tracker, which is designed to fit well into red-green decks. But there are also secret gold cards, like Nessian Hornbeetle, which is a 2-drop green creature which can theoretically fit into any green deck and be solid, but really is built for the red-green deck where there are lots of creatures with power 4 or greater. So cards like Nessian Hornbeetle, cards like Slumbering Cerberus, which are cheap ways to enable the Hornbeetle because it's a 2-drop that has 4 power, and even cards like Eager Truffle Snout fit so much better into this red-green archetype that when you draft them, you need to be aware that they have an optimal home. They're not just green cards that you want to put in every deck, though a lot of decks will still play them. You really want to lean towards a certain direction when you have these cards, and by knowing that, you can identify secret gold cards and pick them up for your decks. Next up, complex does not mean powerful. A simple card design like Helpful Hunter, which is just a 2-mana 1/1 that draws a card when it comes into play, is very, very strong and makes your decks a lot better. It smooths your draw, it affects the board. If it trades for something, you end up a card. It's overall just a really nice card, despite being very simple. On the other hand, a card like Fishing Pole, which is very, very complicated and hard to understand what it does, is much weaker and actually a card you shouldn't be playing at all because it has such a poor impact on the game when you do play it. And that sort of contrast is what you need to be looking for, because simplicity can sometimes be like, oh, I'll just ignore this card because it's so simple. But a card like Dazzling Angel, for example, can be one of the better white commons because it just has such a good impact on the game. Its stats are good, it has evasion, it gains you some life, it synergizes with some of the archetypes. And those are the sorts of things you want to be keeping an eye out for, is the internal bias of, oh, this card is simple, I'm going to dismiss it, and just try not to do that in future sets. Next, looting is strong. It's always important to remember that cards that draw a card and discard a card are quite good. So Refute, which is a 3-mana counterspell, which without the looting ability wouldn't be a particularly strong card, ends up being a very strong player because of this looting ability that makes it so that you can not only smooth your draws in the early turns, but especially in the late game, get rid of extra lands that you don't need, where looting essentially becomes drawing a card. Dreadwing Scavenger is especially powerful because it's a way to loot over and over to really sculpt your hand and fill it with high quality cards that are going to allow you to push past your opponents in the mid to late game situations that you find yourself in your blue-black decks a lot of the time. So these sorts of looting effects are definitely things to keep an eye out for in future sets, even if the base effect isn't one that you would always want to play on its own, like the Refute for 3 mana. So it's a sort of borderline card that can really get pushed over the edge by looting. And then finally, not all reprints work the same. In a set like MTG Foundations with lots of reprints, there are cards like Tolarian Terror, which was really good in its original printing back in Dominaria United and really suffered in this set because it didn't have the support it needed to really be a threat for cheap on the turns you wanted it to be that. On the other hand, a card like Bacon to a Pie was excellent in Throne of Eldraine when it was first printed and was excellent here in MTG Foundations. So you really need to evaluate cards on a case-by-case basis and how they fit into an individual set rather than always just remembering, hey, this card was good before, it's going to be good again. You can oftentimes use that to help you inform your evaluations, but don't let that be the end-all be-all. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. If you made it to the end, leave hashtag foundational in the comments section down below. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.